I'm talking to you today about my top 3 most disturbing asylums. Now, there are a surprising amount of abandoned asylums all over the world, filled with dark histories of abuse and neglect, and many of these institutions couldn't keep up with modern times. Some have been left to ruin and forgotten about in hopes that we will eventually forget their murky pasts. Here are my top 3 asylums with the most disturbing background stories. Number 3. The Metropolitan State Hospital. The Metropolitan State Hospital was located in Massachusetts and opened in 1930. The facility was at one time the largest hospital of its type in New England, and it shared its grounds with the Gables Children's Center for Mentally Ill Young People. Now, it was designed, like most other institutions of the time, using the Kirkbride Plan, so named after the psychiatrist Thomas Kirkbride, who suggested that natural light and good air circulation could have a positive impact on the mentally ill. The hospital came under scrutiny after there were reports of young patients being frequently sedated and harshly disciplined, although that was disputed strongly at the time. In December of 1973, 31-year-old Anne-Marie Davey committed herself to the Metropolitan. A diagnosed schizophrenic, she had been in and out of hospitals in Massachusetts and Maine since the age of 15, and she was also recorded as having mild learning disabilities. On August the 9th, 1978, Anne-Marie was granted permission to walk in the hospital grounds freely without an escort. Now, by the afternoon, she had failed to return to the ward and was so reported missing. Her mother was notified and a preliminary search commenced of the grounds and the facilities at the hospital. But they found no trace of Anne-Marie. But they discovered on the grounds evidence of a makeshift shelter filled with clothing and linens. However, within 24 hours, that tent was torn down and the contents sent to the hospital laundry before anything could be included in the investigation report. Anne-Marie's disappearance was largely played down by the hospital administration, and efforts to find her were suspended until October that year, when staff found a woman's skirt, pieces of cloth, and a pocketbook tied in a bundle. And alongside that, there was a bag containing sunglasses, a hatchet, and photographs on which there were notes written to Anne-Marie. The bag was confirmed to have been hers, but yet again the search was halted. A month later, another patient, Melvin Wilson, was found to be in possession of 7 of Anne-Marie Davey's teeth. The official report into Anne-Marie's disappearance claimed that she and Wilson were friends, with he himself claiming that they would meet at that makeshift tent that they later found and destroyed. Because of this lack of evidence and many other omissions from the Department of Mental Health, it was virtually impossible to prove who last saw Anne-Marie alive. The whole investigation was shockingly mismanaged, and the first official search was not conducted until nearly 2 months after her disappearance. Police weren't contacted, nor any effort made to reach out to department officials for assistance. In 1980, a criminal investigation was launched into Anne-Marie's disappearance, and in August that year, former patient Melvin Wilson led the team to a semi-sheltered area in the grounds where the dismembered remains of Anne-Marie were unearthed from 3 shallow graves. Forensics would later reveal that she'd been murdered and buried on the day of her disappearance. In 1978, after spending a total of 39 years in institutions, Melvin Wilson had been inexplicably transferred from Bridgewater State Hospital, which was a maximum security facility, to the Metropolitan, where many patients were granted free access to the grounds and buildings on campus. And despite the fact that Wilson had been caught carrying 7 teeth, identified as belonging to Anne-Marie, and likely extracted after her death, the department ignored this evidence and proceeded to label her an escaped patient and effectively closed the case. However, in truth, she was abandoned by both the state of Massachusetts and the Department of Mental Health, two agencies tasked with protecting the most vulnerable members of society. And when the sinister truth came out, sole blame was put on lunatic Melvin Wilson, himself a mentally ill ward of the state, and the institutions themselves absolved of any responsibility for the tragedy. Number 2. Poveglia Island, otherwise known as the Isle of the Dead. Poveglia Island is a 17-acre island located in the Venetian lagoon between Venice and Lido. From a distance, it seems a tranquil, beautiful place, lush with green vegetation and several grand old buildings, but beneath the exterior lies a haunting backstory. The dark history of Poveglia can clearly be traced back to the 14th century when the Black Death arrived in Europe. Fearing the spread of the disease, Venice banished many of its citizens there in an effort to isolate the plague victims. The dead were dumped into huge pits and burned or buried. As the disease continued to decimate the population, patients with even the slightest symptoms were transferred, often in the same boat bearing the corpses of the dead, to the island en masse. And there they were given little help or comfort, and when they inevitably perished, were cast onto the flaming pyres and incinerated. It is estimated that well over 150,000 people died on the island at this time. In 1922, the island became home to a psychiatric hospital. Patients reported seeing shadows, hearing wailing, and seeing visions of ghostly apparitions at night. Of course, their concerns were largely ignored because they were deemed, well, crazy. But it was said that one of the doctors in charge of the administration was particularly sadistic and conducted his own experiments on his patients. Unauthorized early-day lobotomies with primitive tools, such as hand drills, screwdrivers and hammers, chemical experiments, and unnecessary limb amputations. According to some sources, the doctor eventually succumbed to the madness, seeing the same ghostly apparitions his patients had reported. He climbed the bell tower and hurled himself to his death. The island has been largely abandoned since the 1960s, and members of the public are forbidden to set foot on it. However, its fascinating and gruesome backstory continues to draw people from across the globe, from ghost hunters to paranormal investigators. Even locals report regularly hearing the sound of chimes carried across the bay, even though the bell in the tower was removed many years ago. Number 1. The Athens Lunatic Asylum. The Athens Lunatic Asylum was operational in Ohio from 1874 to 1993, so well over a century. It provided services to Civil War veterans, children, and those deemed mentally unwell. After a period of abandonment, the site was reopened by Ohio University as The Ridges and houses the museum, auditorium, and several offices. However, the former asylum was notorious for pioneering the now infamous lobotomy procedure, hydrotherapy, and electroshock therapy, all of which are known to be harmful today. At capacity, it housed over 1,800 patients on a 1,000-acre campus. Indeed, by the 1950s, it was the town's largest employer and served patients from over 15 surrounding counties. Causes listed for admission ranged from epilepsy, menopause, alcohol addiction, TB, and general ill health. For female patients, the 3 leading causes of insanity are recorded as conditioning related to childbirth, change of life, and menstrual derangements. The leading cause of insanity among male patients was recorded as masturbation. Depending on the severity of the symptoms, patients' treatments were full care, which was constant incarceration, to amazing freedom, where they could basically walk off-site if they'd wanted to. In 1978, the hospital faced scrutiny after patient Margaret Schilling disappeared. While taking her daily exercise on the grounds, a search failed to find any trace of her, until on the 12th of January, 42 days later, when her body was discovered by a maintenance worker in a locked-up, long-abandoned ward, once used to quarantine patients with infectious diseases. Tests showed she died of heart failure, but mysteriously, she was found naked, with her clothes neatly folded next to her body. And even more interesting is the permanent stain the outline of her body made on the stone floor. Despite numerous attempts to clean and remove it, you can clearly see the imprint of her hair and body to this day. So, there you have it. My top 3 most disturbing asylums and a little history on some of their terrifying backstories. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like or a comment, and don't forget to click on the subscribe button just below for future videos. See you next time.